Welcome to the leanai podcast, where we're flipping the AI conversation on its head by focusing on holistic strategies and tactics that drive AI adoption, rather than focusing solely on overcoming the technical challenges of AI. In every season 1 episode of the leanai podcast, we talk with corporate AI leaders just like you, who've uncovered secrets of driving successful AI adoption with far less wasted time and investment. Our guests challenge established views and offer disruptive perspectives, providing new actionable insights. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the leanai podcast. In season 1 of the show, I've interviewed successful corporate AI executives, asking them to share their best practices for developing AI-powered solutions that create real value and drive adoption. We've also been talking to our guests about, the pitfalls they've encountered to help our listeners avoid wasting time and money building solutions that seem exciting but don't really create any value. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Eric Ries. Eric is our founder here at the Lean Startup Company. He's also the creator of the Lean Startup Approach, author of the books The Lean Startup, The Startup Way, and my personal favorite, The Leader's Guide. He's also the founder of the Long-Term Stock Exchange and advises and invests in countless startups, as well as serving as an advisor to several Fortune 100 companies on the topic of innovation. He's also right in the thick of the AI movement in Silicon Valley as an investor and advisor to dozens of startups leveraging AI. He's also the co-founder of Answer.ai, which is an AI research lab. And in this season 1 finale, we're going to be reviewing several of the key themes that emerged from season 1, get his take on them, and ask for additional insights. So welcome, Eric. We're thrilled to have you.
Thanks for doing this. And I'm so excited how season 1's turned out.
Great. Well, let's hop right into it. So one of the key themes in season 1 has been the importance of identifying kind of the right assumptions to test at the right time. Several of our guests have emphasized the need to test assumptions about customers and their unmet needs, maybe engagement with a solution versus just testing technical feasibility and model accuracy. Could you give our listeners your perspective on how to identify the right assumptions to test at the right time?
Sure. So try to imagine that you've built a business plan for whatever the new AI cool thing you want to build is. And it's really simple. Let's ignore the fiction writing part of the business plan that you wrote in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Just throw that out. That's not important. But let's look at the spreadsheet. Everyone's always got a spreadsheet in Appendix B that shows how the new idea is going to become worth, billions of dollars, $100 million. It depends on the size of the company, how big the promises have to be to get the thing funded. But the spreadsheet is always the same. The beautiful hockey stick shaped growth curve, customers flocking, the high revenue per customer, the extremely high lifetime value, et cetera, et cetera. And now the key to identifying a leap of faith assumption is just to ask yourself, what are the inputs to this model that if they went to zero, the model would be catastrophically destroyed? So let's imagine that there'll be some cell in your spreadsheet. If not, you better redo it. That says something like percentage of customers who try the product, who convert to paying customer, or a percentage of people who see the brochure who pay us, or the revenue per customer in the first transaction, or whatever those critical metrics are. There's going to be a few. And all we want to do is can you visualize in your mind the weapon of mass destruction rippling out through your whole spreadsheet, destroying the whole thing if you change it to zero? And it's uncomfortable when we're doing something new. We're not supposed to talk about the possibility that it might go to zero, but that is a real possibility. And the most important thing is this is not an exercise in skepticism. If you're a product manager and you want to sabotage a rival product manager, it's really easy to just say, well, let's imagine all the things that could go wrong and start enumerating them. You don't even have to say that they are going to go wrong. You're like, have you considered the possibility that customers won't want to buy this? Have you considered, those are considered attacking questions in most corporate contexts. But here, we don't have to tell anybody else. We just have to know for ourselves, these are the leap of faith assumptions, the things that must be true in order for this business plan to make sense. And then you have to do one further step, because this all sounds like a bunch of spreadsheet jockeying, I understand. But the real thing you want to do is understand what are the human behaviors behind the metrics. We always say metrics are people too. What is the human behavior that this represents? And I think this is where people get really tangled up when they're doing innovation. They'll say, this isn't about quality. This is about spreadsheets, but I want to build a really high quality product. Okay. But what does quality really mean? Quality means that when the customer is given the chance to use your product, they find it delightful. Well, delight is a human emotion, hard to measure. But when someone's delighted, what are the behaviors that they exhibit? Oh, of course, they use the product a lot. They refer their friends. They use it again. They come back. Those are the behaviors that the leap of faith assumptions represent. And all we're trying to say in Lean Startup is that when we're doing something highly uncertain, something highly ambitious, something with long-term potential, we want to just know what those assumptions are so that we can find out if they're wrong as soon as possible. Not because we think they're wrong. In fact, we ideally like to find out just double checking that they're right. When they find out they're right, that becomes the basis for making much more rapid and decisive investment in those products based on more than just a hunch.
That's so interesting. And I'm just thinking back to even just episode 1 of this season. Chris Withers said that a lot of us as technologists are excited about the technology. So we want to test all of our assumptions about the technology. When in fact, I think he said something like, some of the assumptions about will customers actually adopt this? Are they going to feel threatened by it? Do they think they're going to lose their job? Those are actually far more important assumptions to test than can we build this thing?
Well, I want to stick up in defense of the technologists for a second, because one of the cool things about AI is it's stretching our imaginations. So, in the previous era of technology development, we went through a kind of a long interregnum where we pretty much could build anything that we could imagine. And we started in innovation circles to de-emphasize the importance of imagination, mostly because we had more good ideas than we knew what to do with. And in software anyway, anything that you can imagine can be built. There was no real cost. It was really just a question of time and do consumers want it? Well, now we're confronted with a technology that has cost of goods sold all of a sudden. So our friends in manufacturing have a big leg up on people who've only ever worked in pure software. But I think a lot of people have jumped to the conclusion that they understand what generative AI is capable of doing. And I think there are a few people on this planet who can say that, but I probably know most of them, and it's very unlikely to be anyone who listen to this. No offense. And I would even include myself in that category. There's truly deep experts. And one of the things the experts have that we don't is they have a much better understanding of what is the possibility of what this technology could do in the near future. The rest of us better play catch up. We better be figuring out the answer to that question. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with focusing on the technology, what it can do, as a way to generate new, bold ideas that are worthy of testing. But we can't assume that just because we've conceived that something is possible, like a futurist, we say, okay, this can happen in the future. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's good that that should happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will happen. It doesn't necessarily mean that customers would like it if it did. And, you and I have been around this long enough. We've both seen situations where people have spent millions and millions of dollars, training a model, deploying it, figuring out how to build software around it, all to discover when they finally get to the moment of deployment that the people they're deploying it to won't use it. And so there's nothing that people, I feel like, defend that process with the idea that it's about quality, it's about decisive action, it's about this, it's about that. Well, building something that nobody wants is not praiseworthy in any dimension. So instead, we should try to learn what people actually do want and build it for them, which is not to say that we should just ask customers what they want. I think we all know that old canard. That's not effective at all. It's no more important than if you said, oh, sorry, I can't do chemistry because I can't ask the electrons what they want. It's like, hello, it's a scientific method. We want to form a hypothesis and test it. And no matter what you believe about craftsmanship, about quality, about product, whatever you believe about what works, market power. Some people are very finance driven. So we were very technology driven, very marketing driven. The importance of brand. I can enumerate so many business theories that I've been pitched over the years. The idea here is that whatever you believe, let's just double check that it's true and test it empirically.
No, it's so important. I think in our episode with Jonathan Bertfield on our Lean Startup Company team, we talked about the differences in kind of the cross-functional team that's needed for when you're developing AI products. And so I would say previously with kind of general lean startup teams that are running lean startup, it was all about, you need a product person, you need an engineer, maybe a marketing person, somebody that knows customers. And we all kind of had a sense of what was feasible that was kind of commonly understood. But you're totally right. In this new space of AI, it's not exactly clear what's possible. It's not exactly clear what data we have. And even if we have it, if we can use it and how we can use it and what's possible. And so one of the insights from that episode was bringing in a data specialist and an AI specialist much more earlier, in fact, from the beginning, whereas typically you wouldn't need to do that, just to make sure that what we have in mind is even feasible to build.
Everyone knows what a Venn diagram looks like. And the problem with teaching kids Venn diagrams is that we teach them that there is always an overlap zone between the two things that are being put into the Venn diagram. But actually, in real world situations, here we're trying to figure out, right, like the circle of what is possible to build and what is desirable for customers to have. We're assuming that there's an overlap zone and that our product, our MVP, our experiment is going to sit in that overlap zone. But there's no like cosmic law of the universe that what you can build overlaps with what customers want. In fact, far more often you wind up with headlights, not, not a Venn diagram at all. And so that's okay. Like we have to accept that that's a possibility. But I do think that in a corporate setting, because so many corporate cultures are so anti-imagination, anti-creativity, we oftentimes don't allow our teams to actually explore the full space of what is possible. We've pre-constrained it. And this was true before AI. I'll never forget, I was working with a company I shouldn't say the company, but they were a company that competes with Amazon. And so they were really, constantly talking about how Amazon was eating their lunch. They're fighting with Amazon on multiple fronts, big company with many divisions. Amazon is in competition with them many times. And they were like, this particular little team I was coaching, they're trying to build a new software product that would compete with Amazon. And they were like, we're finally using the tool of the enemy. Like they were focused on software. We're going to do it this way. And we're going to try to figure it out. And I remember they were sitting there talking about the constraints of the problem. Well, we can't do this because of that, or we have to go we have to outsource this piece, or we have to get this person's permission. They were like enumerating all these extra things. And I finally said, look, just can you guys tell me if Amazon was actually having this meeting right now, is this the way they would approach the problem? And they all laughed like, oh no, they don't waste time on any of this stuff. I was like, so are we competing with them or not? Like, what's the deal? And they were like, oh, well, I guess they're just way better at this than we are. But it was like, are they? Or could you just choose right now to bring forward like the full power of software and unleash it here? And what's interesting is a lot of companies that they're not software native, always felt like they were inferior or behind these other platform companies. And it's kind of a funny situation now where actually, even if that's true, and if you're feeling that anxiety right now, everybody's on a level playing field with generative AI because absolutely nobody knows anything about what to do with it. You look at these big companies, how many of them have successfully deployed a generative AI product at all? Even if you look at the top most valuable tech companies, even the ones that are reaping the massive rewards from the generative AI boom, how many of them have actually deployed a successful generative AI product? I can think of 3 or 4, right? Like maybe you can think of 5 or 6, but like we're not talking about 10, we're not talking about 100. So we all have a chance to leapfrog. So I think it's ever more important when we build these teams to really bring cross-functional discipline together, like get people, as we've always said in Lean Startup with team construction, full-time, not part-time committee, full-time dedicated members, the old Amazon canard of the 2-pizza team, right? A team no bigger than you can feed with 2 pizzas. Get people in a room together and say, look, you've got to figure this out together. You got to find the full exploration of what's possible. And I have done this exercise in startups, in corporations, from 2 guys in a garage up to big multinationals with hundreds of thousands of employees, or big government agencies with millions of employees. And it's always the same. You have the least important person in the room at some point will speak up and say, well, if you really wanted to do that specific thing, do you know about this? And everyone looks and they're like, well, no, never. What are you talking about? We've never heard of it. It's like, oh, well, everyone in my field knows that X, Y, Z. Or like, oh, everyone in the marketing department knows that customers, what they really would pay for is this. Or, everyone, you pick a field, people know it. Everyone in customer service knows that this is the number one thing people call and yell at me about. Does everyone else in this room know that? No, that's actually really useful information. Thank you for sharing. So, I think it's that cross-functional collaboration is right on. Yeah, and shout out to Jonathan. He's terrific.
No, absolutely. So I think another theme, and this actually kind of follows like a build, measure, learn type of sequence. So one of the themes was, how do we know, the right assumptions to test at the right time, the right mix of technical versus kind of customer assumptions. I think the next theme that I really wanted to highlight and get your take on is then, okay, great. We have some assumptions, but we really need to iteratively learn and experiment to find out if those assumptions are true or not. And there's just too many stories out there of companies really overbuilding only to find out they built something that flops in the market and doesn't meet customer needs. I had a gut-wrenching call a month ago where someone said, "Hey, I'm really interested in this lean AI thing. Can you help?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure. What's going on?" And they said, "Well, we spent the last 2.5 years and we built this whole thing and it's great and it's beautiful and it does all these things, but like nobody understands it or what it does and they don't use it." And I said, "Well, it's maybe a little too late, right? Like you should have thought about who your customer was ahead of time." And so could you maybe review the concept of a minimum viable product or an MVP and share your perspective on how the best startups are leveraging MVPs?
This is an exceptionally misunderstood concept. And every, I don't know, every 6 months or so, someone sends me a message that's like, if only you'd named the concept something else, then people wouldn't get confused. And I've been through lots of iterations of trying that out with clients and with customers and let me just tell you, the issue is not in the terminology. The issue is not in how we define it. The issue is in human nature and our extreme business culture that we live in. That's all about, claiming you can predict the future when you really can't, and just hoping that it will work out. And unfortunately, in too many companies, middle managers have gotten good at setting up these long time horizon projects where they can basically get promoted into another job before the bleep hits the fan. And then they never have to be accountable for the beautiful plans that they worked on. And it's funny, talk to executives and they'll just be like, well, there are these certain managers that just have this golden reputation that everything they touch turns to gold. And if you dig in, you'll find out what they're really good at is making these beautiful plans that don't have to have contact with reality. And the ding in the performance file will be whoever had to execute the plan after they were gone. They're the ones who they get screwed up. And and I remember doing this negotiation once where someone said to me, it's going into one of these meetings with a very cocky middle manager. And he said, look, the magic key, just so you know, I want you to have my back in this meeting. Whatever they say about what happened with this beautiful plan that we built out, make sure you ask them, did you follow the plan exactly? And then the answer to that question is always no. And then whatever they say, they deviated from the plan. That's the reason it didn't work. If only you'd followed the plan exactly, you would have. And people are good at that. It's just an incredibly effective way of evading accountability in too many company cultures. So if you have a friend's company that's doing that, you got to put a stop to that. It's terrible. So minimum viable product is a really, really simple idea. It's just, given the thing that you want to learn with your experiment, what is the least amount of work we have to do to discover the truth of the situation? And people immediately like, you're talking about cutting corners. You're talking about ignoring safety. You're talking about lacking quality. It's like, no. If you tell me those things are essential, put them in the MVP. You tell me what's essential. But most times, most companies have these elaborate plans that do not require so much work. And so by the time they find out that something's wrong, as you said, it's too late to change, or it's very expensive to change. So in a minimum viable product, what we want to do is just find ways to reduce the scope. And actually, in a lot of cases, we will, by doing so, increase the quality. So in the, here are some of the classics, then we can talk about AI specific. Classic MVP, you're manufacturing something. To manufacture 1 million units is a lot harder than manufacturing 1,000 units. It's a lot harder than manufacturing 1 unit. Well, if we didn't care about the cost per unit at all, could you manufacture me 1 unit that is exactly what customers want? And could we go sell it to them? People think, well, of course I could do that, but what's the point? Aren't we supposed to be a mass manufacturer? Well, if you can't sell 1 unit, you can't sell 1,000. So let's first find someone who wants the 1 unit. In software, we have all these techniques. We call them a concierge MVP, for example, where a human being works behind the scenes to make sure that the results are really good. We see that a lot with AI, where people think they're interacting with an AI, but it's actually an AI-human hybrid behind the scenes. We do that to make sure that customers actually like the deliverables that we're creating. And the reason why MVPs are so powerful, we've been emphasizing the negative, obviously, because in corporate settings right now, we have this epidemic of people wasting money and time on these products that nobody wants. But there's a positive side of it too. Go talk to your favorite technologist and ask them, what would you rather have? A blank sheet of paper and a specification document with total freedom to make whatever you want? Or would you like 3 examples of actual deliverables that customers have already been willing to pay for, and you know exactly how much they would pay for this specific deliverable? The technology problem, and I say this as a technologist myself, the technology problem is dramatically easier to solve with examples, and not the kind of fake examples we put in product management, PRD documents, and stuff like that. The real example of, here's a real customer who actually paid us money for the real thing. And that's incredibly important with AI, because it's just so much easier to generate the deliverable. So it's like the cost of doing the MVPs is a lot lower, especially if we're willing to use off-the-shelf existing components, use existing foundation models. Like there's so many things we can do that reduce the scope of the problem. And then you say, well, but we can't afford to have a human being generate the results for 1 million customers. That's okay. Let's do it for 10. And then let's figure out how to do automation. Let's figure these things out.
So in the space of specifically of AI, what are some of the types of MVPs that you've seen successful startups use?
So everyone's got a fancy demo. AI's got unbelievable whiz-bang demos absolutely everywhere. So that's not bad. I don't mind the demo at all, as long as the customer can buy it. So like, is there a sign up? Is there a way to sign up for the demo right now? And people are like, but I can't. I don't have a sign up page. I don't have a this. I don't have a that. Well, let's work on those things. And look, AI should be making those things a lot easier. So a whiz bang demo with a sign up page is totally fine. People say, well, if I do that, it's just a wrapper around OpenAI or Anthropic or something like that. That's okay. Building your whole company around a wrapper is dubious, but using wrappers in order to discover what customers want, totally fine. And you may discover, as a lot of startups have, that fundamentally, although you have a really good idea, there's nothing special about it. It's completely non-defensible. So I'll give you an example. I was just with a startup that was evaluating an AI product, and was helping them think through what to do. And they had an AI researcher that they had brought in to help them think it through. And the first thing that person did, who was super smart, was to sit and watch them use their existing tools to figure out what, just basically like the old P&G follow me home, right? Just, okay, well, show me what you're doing today. Like, let me see a day in your life. And they had pulled up this AI product that cost like $600 a month or something. It was pretty expensive to do this thing. And the engineer instantly was like, that's interesting. I wonder if Claude out of the box from Anthropic could do just a good idea. And they just sat there every time the customer would type in something to the specialized tool, they would type in the same thing into Claude and they'd say, blind taste test. Do you like output A or do you like output B? The customer always preferred output B. He's like, well, I could save you $600 a month right now. So if you think about that, like, how is that even conceivably possible that somebody's got this tool out there that's not as good as the foundation model out of the box? And how come this person was using the wrong one, not knowing that there's just, they had the right level of expertise? So it's really important to do those kinds of really simple experiments. And for those who want to learn more about how to correct good prompts and how to do problem solving with AI, there's some pretty good courses out there, including one that we're developing at Answer AI, which I'm happy to share a link with. But more than needing a course, I think you need hands-on experience, like trying to do it. The other like major approach that I think is really not being utilized enough is to make the product that people initially sign up for not AI, but something else powered by AI. So for example, I was just mentioning the course. Well, this has been really effective for a couple of companies where instead of having people buy a product from you, they buy a course from you. They sign up to learn about some general technique that involves the beta of your tool that you want them to use. Like, that's a classic MVP in which the customer is getting access to the tool and they're even paying for it, but you have much more control over how it's used. You make sure that every person who uses it is trained in it. You can get their feedback from it and they're happy. At the end of the course, they had a successful course. They learned something of real value. So then they're not upset if the tool wasn't really as good as you were hoping it was, or could kind of cover for the weaknesses in the tool. And then, of course, it creates a really natural next experiment to say, like now that the course is ended, do you still want access to this tool? If people are like, nope, that's great, got what I wanted out of it, that tells you a lot about how valuable it is compared to if they're begging you to gain access. So that's also a really effective MVP technique.
I love it. And it's a lot of the LOFAs, the leap of faith assumptions out there have to do with what's the experience like? Do we know how customers are going to interact with this tool? Do they know what to do? So that the course example is a really good one. Let's move into another area, which is the fact that, and this has been a little bit less kind of explicitly mentioned, but definitely a thread that's been woven through several of the conversations in season one. And that is the way that projects are typically funded at large corporations. So basically allocating full funding and resources up front, as opposed to maybe more of a metered funding approach. Could you maybe talk about the dangers of the full upfront funding approach when developing AI-powered solutions?
Yeah, well, cost overruns are crazy in software in general. So when we add the uncertainty of AI to it, it's really wild. And especially because we have actual costs, like the applications are expensive to operate. So in order to know what you should spend on a unit cost basis on a given tool, you really need to know what people's willingness to pay is. So it's very common to see business plans in a corporate setting where the ROI is calculated by made up number divided by made up number. And it's like, looks pretty good. And then you're like, great, let's invest $100 million, $10 million, do whatever the number is. Let's invest on the basis of that ROI calculation. And then, when was the last time you did one of those experiments, built or frankly experiments, you funded some project like that and the results came back where the ROI was better than what was in the fantasy plan? I can't even think of a time. It's nuts. It's always much, much, much worse. So you can easily, like, at least with the previous era of software cost overruns, you do a Salesforce implementation or some other vendor implementation, right? It would take 10 times longer and it'll cost you way more money. Like, at least the level of disaster it was pretty much constrained by the number of people that were working on the project. And obviously the opportunity cost of having your whole company be bogged down in this deployment, over the course of months or years. But here, you also could have, in addition to all those costs, you can have the runaway costs of the thing itself. I mean, how many AI applications right now, are charging $1 for something that costs $1.50 and trying to make it up in volume? There's no profitability there. And unlike traditional software, there are not the returns to scale. You get more customers, you get more volume. OpenAI charges you the same. It's not really that helpful. So it's a really different intuition than a lot of technologists have, and a lot of people who are used to product management on the non-technical side have. And so when we fund projects all up front, it feels like we're being committal. I think this is really the issue. Most corporations lack conviction. And if you ask startups about their investors, say, what is the most prized attribute of a startup investor? People outside of the industry will say, oh, I want the smartest person, I want the person who will give it the best connections, best brand, best this, blah, blah, blah. Those things are all nice. But the number one most important attribute is an investor with independent conviction, is what we call it. That is someone who can look at the data about what you're doing and make a decision to write you a check or tell you no in a clear and simple way. It's actually really, really difficult. There's this idea of social proof. Well, if other investors are in, then I want to be in too. There's people who kind of drag on the decision forever. There's people that only invest in stuff, that kind of in a very sporadic way or undisciplined way. And those people are just very difficult to deal with. Independent conviction is so valuable. Well, most corporations, because of our financial system, have been losing their conviction. It's actually really sad. So in those kind of situations, people feel like the antidote to that is to get a big budget and force the company to commit to spend it. That's why a lot of crazy M&A deals get done that are really horrendous. People feel like it's the macho, serious way to invest in something. Well, putting money in upfront to a project is not inherently bad, but oftentimes the way we do that, instead of saying, look, even if you're going to spend $10 million on a project, it's very different to say, look, here's a check for $10 million, go put it in your bank account now, spend it, and if you run out, there's no more coming, right? Your actual constraint is really different than if you do continuous funding. And most companies still do, an annual budgeting cycle where everyone, gets together once a year and the budgets are set. So there's no every middle manager understands that there's no spending $1 million on a project or $10 million on a project. When you commit money to a project, that's like a subscription fee. It's not $1 million. It's $1 million a year ad infinitum, probably with raises for inflation. And not to mention if the project is perceived to be going well, what happens next? And think about that from the point of view of the incentive structure of the leader of that project. This is really the crux of the issue psychologically. Make a little Nash equilibrium, for those who know game theory, a little chart 2x2. There's two axes that matter. Axis number one, the most critical decision any leader has to make in a product organization is, do I ship the product or do I delay? Okay, so that's one decision I have to make. And when I make that decision, then the universe gets to decide what happens as a result. So if I ship the product, then there's two possibilities. It's either goes great or it doesn't go as well as I hoped. And if I don't ship the product, actually everything's the same, always goes great. Delay is not a problem because maybe people grumble about it, but my budget continues. So if you think about the payoff in these situations, if I delay, my budget continues. If I ship and it goes well, maybe my budget could be increased. But if I ship and it does not go well, that is the one and only time that my project is vulnerable to cancellation. And so it's extremely rational to delay. People, I can't tell you how many executives I've worked with over the years are like, why does everybody always delay everything around here? How come no one ever does anything? It takes an irrational, crazy person to be like, we're going to ship it anyway, even though the incentives are messed up this way. And of course, I got to tell executives, well, go look in the mirror. You're the one who created the incentive system. Don't blame the people who are responding rationally to it. So we have to get out of that trap. And with AI, it's even worse because it's much easier with AI to create the illusion of progress with nonstop, constant whiz-bang demos. Not just because AI is very malleable and people who are good at it are really good at making demos, but also the underlying state of the art is moving faster than any technology I have ever seen in my life. So there's always new stuff to demo coming out if you just stay on the cutting edge of all of it. If you read the research papers and try other people's whiz-bang demos, it's like you have nonstop fodder to make people feel like, yeah, this is exciting and cool. But is that real progress? Unfortunately, it is not.
Hey there, this is Ben Hafele, CEO of the Lean Startup Company. If you're ready to take your corporate team's innovation capabilities to the next level, I've got something exciting just for you that we created to ensure that the world's largest companies can still innovate like startups. We're offering a free 2-hour interactive workshop designed to help you and your team take a more systematic approach to innovation. In the workshop, we'll guide you through hands-on breakout sessions to help you select the right innovation projects to work on in the first place, how to set up your teams for success, including selecting the right team members, how to identify the capabilities your teams and leaders need, pick the right innovation systems to put in place, and how to strike the right balance between trusting your teams and maintaining accountability. But here's the catch. We can only run 2 of these sessions in a given month. So if you're ready to start innovating like a startup again, now's your chance. Head on over to leanstartup.co/free workshop to reserve your spot. But don't wait, spaces fill up fast and we don't want you to miss out. Again, that's leanstartup.co/free workshop. Let's make successful innovation a reality for your team today. And it's actually the pace of change is something that's another theme that came out, including in our most recent episode with Mike Hollinger, just talking about you need to plan for the fact that the technology is going to change weekly in whatever you're doing, but you can't delay and never do anything. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there. It's going to change. You're going to think, let's do that. And you'll never actually make any progress. So it's that kind of middle ground between moving forward and also just being open to changes in the future. But I want to come back to the conviction sentiment. That is just so spot on. And it's conviction and also consensus, right? So it's if we can get consensus that we all agreed on this, we all put a big budget on it, then if it doesn't go well, we can kind of say, well, we were all in it together. We had a big budget. We did everything we could. So it's almost like a defensive mechanism. So I guess we've talked about the problem with, upfront funding in full. Maybe let's talk about metered funding and how that can be kind of an antidote for some of those issues.
Metered funding helps in 2 ways. The first is, everyone says they know that necessity is the mother of invention, but what is the mother of necessity? How do you create necessity? Most companies are just too big and too rich for anyone who works there to ever actually feel like the resources are constrained, even though everyone complains about not having the resources to do their job constantly. But that's because we've sliced what's the expression? We've spread the peanut butter too thin. We're just, we've given a little bit to everything. So everyone's like in a starvation state, but it's not because the company lacks money. It's because it lacks conviction to be able to make a smaller number of higher quality bets. So when we do metered funding, what we do is we tell a team you have a fixed resource pool. And we usually talk about it in money in a for-profit context, but I've worked in governments and nonprofits where it's actually time boxing or some other constraint. It doesn't really matter what the constraint is, but we establish the constraint up front and we establish the criteria for getting more of whatever the resource is. And people who've done stage gate development or who've used a conventional funding process will be like, well, that's what we do. But it's not what you do. Unfortunately, the politics of the situation are very different. Here we explicitly say that the default answer is no more unless we see the results that we want to see. Now, as soon as you do that, people will be like, but I thought you said we can't predict the results. Aha. Now is the beginning of wisdom. That's right. So we can't denominate our result in the units of hockey stick growth because ideally the time and the money is small. I would, Y Combinator, the famous Y Combinator incubator program is only 10 weeks, 12 weeks long. The whole program. So people can build whole new startups that go on to become multi-billion-dollar companies in a couple months. What do you need 6 months for? Why do you need 12 months? Why do you need 18 months? How about a month? There used to be this fad for doing this thing called Startup Weekend to see how much progress people could make on a new idea in a weekend. And I thought that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard until I started going to some of those events. And you see the incredible results people can make in a weekend. Like when properly motivated, when people feel a sense of ownership and control over their own work, people are extraordinarily creative and productive. I don't care how boring they seem on the outside. Even in corporations, I've met so many people who've blown me away with their capabilities. So that's one thing. We create this scarcity mindset. We create the idea in startups, we call this being default dead instead of default alive, meaning if you don't change the situation, you are going to die. But the other advantage to metered funding at the executive level is it allows us to take a wider portfolio of bets. Because I don't think there's anything wrong. If someone says, look, we want to invest $100 million in generative AI this year, I think that's pretty smart. I would be making big bets here. This is a very transformational technology and companies need to get with this program or they're going to be in big trouble. That's not wrong. The problem is you say, well, I'm going to allocate $100 million to my one bet. You're extremely vulnerable if it's not exactly right. And so not only are you creating the conditions for it to go slow and be less likely to work, you're also creating all your eggs in one basket kind of problem. I mean, much rather if you said, look, we're going to create a $100 million fund to fund a number of experiments. And people say, well, how many experiments do I need? I remember doing this exercise once with the executive team of a big company where we had them actually like try to think about how many successes they wanted to have per year. The CEO had very specific growth targets, and they had a great metric they were tracking. It was something like, percentage of revenue that came from products that didn't exist 3 years ago. So they actually like had formal OKRs around like, we want to innovate, we want to have growth that is driven by innovation. It was like, excellent, good, good, good. On average, when you have a new one of these things succeed, how much money does it make? Okay. And what is that as a percentage of your overall revenue? And they realize, okay, we need to have, I can't remember the numbers now, it's been a little while. We need to have 10 bets a year that work. And you're like, excellent. Okay. So let's work backwards. How many experiments do you need to run to get 10 a year that will work? Well, I come from the startup world. What do you think the average level of like, what is the average success rate of a company that graduates from Y Combinator or who successfully raises a seed round to get to the next round, to the next round, to the next round? And people said, oh, they probably like 95%, 80%, someone might be as low as 75%. It's like, oh, no. 75% die, not succeed. And they were like, what? You can't live in a world. I was like, it's common wisdom that only 1 in 10 startups has like success. But like, if you look at any of the metrics, it's power law, like it's decimation. Most startups don't make it even past the first hurdle, let alone 3, 4, 5 hurdles. So it's like, so let's imagine how many hurdles we need to have. And I made a very simple model. I think we even gave them a very aggressive success rate. I think we said, like, oh, let's assume that you get 50% of startups make it in your model. You guys are so good at picking the winners. You're so good. People are so smart. Let's assume that 50% graduate and just do the math. I can't remember. I think we did 4 hurdles, 50% attrition rate. I'm not going to do the math live on camera, but if you have 10 winners at the end, you need a lot of bets at the beginning. And then people are like, well, we can't afford to give, 1,000 internal startups $1 million, let alone $100 million. It's like, right. Now you see the logic of MVPs. Now you see the logic of metered funding. We want to make them inexpensive and then really double down where it works. So I would say like the 2 halves of the whole that makes sense here, right? You have metered funding, MVPs, what stuff we've been talking about, leap of faith assumptions. The other half is decisive, rapid, and large commitments when we see success. And not like from $1 million to $100 million. But I'm a big fan of doubling. Like if we've got something working, let's double it and let's do it quickly to see if it still works at twice the size. And that's another common problem we see in companies, and especially with AI, because speed is so much of the essence. If you discover one of these opportunities, probably one of your competitors working on it right now. So, delaying for a month while you decide whether or not to do the next experiment is really foolish. We already agreed when we funded the experiment, that meant we automatically agreed to fund the follow-up if the first one is a success. That has to be the agreement. And it's really funny to see how many companies, the politics of the situation make that impossible.
And I think one of the things you just crystallized, which I think is going to be really valuable for our listeners, is with metered funding, the default answer is no. Unless you can prove traction, the answer is no more funding. Whereas with kind of the traditional corporate approach, the default answer is yes. You have plenty of time. Do you need more money? Do you need another check? What else do you need? And that makes that funnel math even more powerful, right? Because it's, hey, you didn't show evidence, therefore we're going to kick out that use case from the funnel and we're going to assign you to a different use case that's in backlog. Go. And it's automatic. It's not based on politics or decisions that need to be made over weeks. There's specific criteria that are set. And it's a highly efficient machine for vetting, shaping, and de-risking AI use cases. Anything else to talk about in this space, Eric, in terms of funding, metered funding, what you're seeing in the startup world that you can share with the audience?
Well, I'll tell you a story about a company where we installed this decision-making system, and the executives of this company were this made me, your comment made me think of this. They were always complaining to me that the people who worked there just didn't care about the success criteria that executives set for things. Executives are like, look, we need growth. We need customers to be happy. We need cycle time to be rapid. They had these real beliefs about what needed to happen. And then we would tell projects, do this, or you're not going to get funded, or you're not going to get this, or you're going to be fired, or whatever. And they're like, people don't believe us. And it was funny because in that same company, I've been hearing from employees who are like afraid if they do something innovative, they're going to be fired. And one of the executives being like, I wish we fired people around here, right? It's actually really hard to fire people. So it was like a real disconnect between the executives and thing. And they were like, we want you to help us make the employees care more about results. And I said, great, I will do that, but not in the way that you expect. So if you trust me and you're willing to do this experiment, try it and you might like it. And I will hang my hat on this outcome. And they're like, well, you're just going to go tell all the people to pretend to, I was like, you can have one of your people monitoring me in every workshop. And several of the executives follow me around every time I interact. They were like, we're going to watch you like a hawk. They were very want to make sure I kept to my word. I promise I won't mention that even one time. And yet it will happen. And they were like, who does this guy think he is? But it was really easy. I was like, it's a classic, like making a bet, you can win. It was a magic trick because we created this metered funding thing. And the first wave of projects, we said, look, I can't remember how we did it in this company. I think we said you had 4 weeks we gave them a fixed budget and a fixed time, very constrained to show progress. And if you come to the next meeting and you haven't shown the progress that's necessary, you will fail. And we did the thing. Not a single person asked us what the criteria was for the next meeting, which is really interesting. Everyone knows what success means around here. And they just went off and did it. And the execs are looking at me like, see, it's like, just wait. Came back the next time and we had the meeting. And I was sitting with the executive, they had a little cabal afterwards after the presentation of progress. And we went through each one. And each one, I would be like, did they achieve what we call validated learning in Lean Startup? And every executive's first instinct was like, well, no, but we should give them some more time. Every team had a really good excuse for why they should get more time. And I was like, all my job was to sit there and remind everybody, remember what our agreement was? That project is canceled. And they went out and they gave every one of the projects, I think, except for one, got the death sentence that they were to be disbanded. And people were shocked like you wouldn't believe. And the way we had set up, the next wave of projects was queued up. They were in the same meeting. So they watched what happened to wave 1 and they're watching them all get mowed down. And they were all like, every single one of the presentations in the next cohort of projects, first question was, what do we have to demonstrate to get more funding? And the executives were looking at me like, how did you perform this magic trick? I was like, it's not a magic trick. Just actually credibly explained how resources are going to be unlocked. And it's just one of my biggest findings in all of the work I've done in corporate structure and governance and accountability is that there is this force of gravity that influences people's behavior whenever they interact with organizations, really. It's not really even about money in corporations, but in a for-profit setting, it's very much about money. When we have a power imbalance, when we have something and somebody else wants it, this human psychology is that we all do this unconsciously. We unconsciously warp our values and beliefs to match what we perceive to be the thing we have to do to get what we want. And hopefully that sounds like the most obvious thing in the world to you. But if you think about what that means, when we see people exhibiting a certain behavior in an organization, it's almost always because they think, if we're an executive, they think that's what we want them to do. And if we tell them, I don't want you to do that, that has almost no effect because I didn't change their perception of what they think we want to do. They're like, oh, I see, got it. You want to be the kind of company where we pretend that we do one thing, but we actually do the other? Yes, sir. Hypocrisy, here we come. So actually executives are constantly making it worse and worse and worse. So once you understand that psychology, a lot of these systems make a lot more sense, that we have to find ways to actually demonstrate to people the actual path to get what they want. And oftentimes what they want is not even that selfish. A lot of people join companies because they believe in the mission, even still in our degraded times. And, even with companies that have been kind of surgically deboned and lack all conviction, you still have people that join because they actually care about the things that the company makes. They care about the customers that they serve. They feel like the only way to get to work on these kinds of projects is to come work at this company. So they're there to do something they actually care about doing it. And all they're thinking about all day is like, what do I have to do to actually get the work done, to actually serve customers, to actually have success? And if we take that out of the realm of politics and into the realm of science, we see extraordinary results.
That's amazing. And I think you and I have been talking, a lot over the last couple of years about how lean startup and now lean AI is a system, right? And so it's not about just training teams or getting teams to identify LOFAs and run experiments and come back with insights. If executives aren't holding teams accountable and saying, hey, if you don't get this level of validated learning, we're going to recycle you into a different project and this project is canceled. If you're not demonstrating that as an executive, and if you don't realize you have a legitimate role in the system, the whole thing falls apart to the point where now, in a lot of cases at the lean startup company, people will call us and say, "Hey, we want you to train a bunch of teams on lean startup." And we'll say, "Okay, what about executives?" And they'll say, "No, they're busy. Don't talk to the executives." And we'll just say, "No, we don't want to take your money because it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work unless the executives are the ones who are asking the teams to do it." So that really resonates with me. So thanks, Eric. Unfortunately, we are almost out of time. Just to wrap things up, what are the top three insights or perspectives you could offer to anyone developing AI powered solutions?
So here's one of the really interesting things about generative AI. There's all these people out there who have made the absolute assumption that the technology stack of generative AI is going to be more or less the same as SaaS. So I've been consuming. I read everything written about AI. I read all the papers, but I also read all the business analysis and consulting reports and stuff. And I can't tell you how many of these reports. It's almost like they took the SaaS software stack, crossed out the word SaaS in crayon, crossed out all the labels in crayon, and wrote in AI. AI this, AI that. But the basic assumption is that everything is the same. And I just think that is very foolhardy. I do not think we understand what the economic logic of this new technology is going to be. I mentioned already that we have the issue of cost of goods sold, but we also have this very unusual situation where the platforms are bearing tremendous cost to develop these models, and we have open source racing to basically like steal all that value and make it available to everybody for free. If people have not tried the new generation of open source models, you're missing out. It's actually very important to have an understanding of that. I was just with a startup where the Chinese coding model from Qwen 2.5, I think it is exceptionally good, better than some of the foundation models. And so there's just like new capabilities are just dropping left and right. So we have to be very humble about understanding what the stack is going to look like. And in particular, this is just a time for fundamental analysis. Where is the value going to accrue? That's kind of lesson number one, is to really be thoughtful about where is value. It's like Michael Porter's 5 forces. If you had to learn that, study that in economics class or business school, it's time to review those concepts. Where is power going to accrue? And therefore, like, what makes sense to do? Where is the space to explore with these new capabilities? So that is really powerful. And like I said earlier, you can only really understand that by trying them yourself. I feel like, who would I recommend? Maybe Ethan Mollick. You can link to him, the business school professor. Is he at Wharton, I think? Has done an exceptional job, like almost reinventing himself as the guy who tries out every new AI thing and writes about it for a business audience. But there's a lot of people who have done that. So you think about like what a huge accelerant that has been to his career. That could be you. You could have that same acceleration effect within your own organization, within your own career, if you just be the person who actually gets their hands dirty and tries all the stuff. And I'm not just talking about, okay, I made a video by typing in a prompt, but like, get your hands dirty at the next layer down. You'll find exceptional results if you really start to deeply understand. The second consequence of this difference that I think is really, really interesting is that almost every AI company today, even the so-called AI native companies, are still organized as if they were SaaS companies. So like, how are they growing? They are scaling up massive human sales forces. They are doing all the same pricing and business model things the previous wave of platforms. It makes sense. The people who lead these companies, that's how how did they get rich enough to get in the position to get to be the leader of one of these companies? They came from that world. So they're applying all this kind of company building logic to this technology. And listen, it's working out great for them so far. So that might even be the right thing to do. But I'm really intrigued by the contrarians who are trying to do something different. And again, I'll use my own company where I'm the co-founder, Answer AI. Jeremy Howard is the he's the main founder. And this was actually a delight for me to be the sidekick for once. So I'm there to help him realize this vision. And he's been studying deep learning and machine learning longer than some of the people listening to this have been alive. And he really believes that it will be possible to create a company that is one of the world's, or maybe the most valuable company in the world, with a human staff of about 12 people. I'm not talking about 12 programmers plus 1,000 support staff. I'm talking about 12 really smart generalists. And he might be crazy, we might be wrong, but like, just starting with the thought exercise of what would have to be true, what are the leap of faith assumptions that would be necessary for that to work has already led to numerous breakthroughs where we're doing things at dramatically lower cost and with dramatically lower labor effort necessary just by forcing ourselves to actually use AI to augment our own capabilities. So to me, this is like people who are the most bullish on AI, and there's the most AI rhetoric, even the people who are saying that AI is dangerous and it's about to take over all human labor. Do they actually act in their own work and in their own company building as if they believe that to be true? A lot of the cases, the answer is no. And that I think leads to really interesting questions about what are their actual revealed beliefs. Last idea is not just to think about this in terms of our own company building, but also it changes our relationship with the vendors of the previous generation. So again, going back to Jeremy, one of the things that blew my mind was we were working, and I don't want to be too specific because this is an unreleased product that we're talking about, but we were working on a certain product, and I've built products like that before in my life, and so has he. And I had this assumption that, okay, if we're going to build and scale a product like that, we need to not only build it, hire people to build it. That's what we were kind of talking about. And we're like, no, we're not going to hire people to build it. We're going to use our small little team and we're going to do it. But also I was like, oh, we got to go get all these vendors. Can't do this without vendor. We need a security vendor and a hosting vendor and a this vendor and a that vendor. And we're going to do this and do that. And I was like ready to go. I'm going to go spend $1,000 or whatever it would have been in initial costs to set up all these things. And as we scaled, our costs would scale with all these vendors. And of course, then I'm like, man, who's going to manage all these vendor relationships? And he was like, Eric, we don't need to do any of that. I just used the AI to help me figure out how to do this in an exceptionally low cost way. So we'll just build and maintain the stuff in-house. And I was like, but what about the cloud? He's like, we don't need the cloud. This is like, when I said, we don't need the cloud. It's like, wait a minute, but I just spent the last 15 years of my life trying to convince all these people to get their deployments off their premises and into the cloud. He's like, well, too bad for them because there's this whole new wave of capability where we don't need that. And I was like, but hold on. We actually went through it together because I was like, I had such a deep conditioning that you have to do these things a certain way. And it was really, really interesting when you break it down from first principles. And Jeremy's an exceptional first principles thinker. That's why he and I get along so well. We look at each of the individual components. Why do we need a vendor to do this? Well, there's just all these little finicky details that you have to figure out. Like the there's all these sysadmin tasks, and you need there's all this specialty knowledge. So as the scale gets harder, we're going to have to hire all these sysadmins to have these specialty knowledge. I was like, well, or I could just ask the AI to solve each problem that comes up for me. And it does. It already has all that specialty knowledge, and we get it for $20 a month, basically for free. Well, I need 1,000 people for. What do I need any people for? And we went through it. I was like, but what about the security thing? I was like, oh yeah. He's like, oh yeah, good idea. We better make sure we do a really proper security audit. Do I have to hire a security audit firm to do that? No. Claude is exceptionally good at this. Hey, Claude, can you please, here's the scenario we gave him, gave Claude, I gotta stop anthropomorphizing these things. He's not alive, but he's not a he, but yet we gave Claude access to the thing and said, okay, please help us find all the different ways to exfiltrate the secret information from the thing. And we did a very thorough pen test, far better than you could get from a human until the human had spent hundreds or thousands of hours, really getting up to speed on the environment, all the details. Claude already has all that context automatically. So it was no problem to do a pen test, to do a security audit, and I won't go through all the things we were able to do without having to hire anybody. So not only do we have to hire anybody, but we also need to do these vendors. So I think that has really profound implications for the industry map of what is to come. Both we as company builders, we better be thinking about, are we building a vendor that is not needed anymore, right? Are we building a service provider where the service is not needed anymore? But also, are we consuming services and being led by our beliefs about what the economic constraints are around these projects? Are they really true? And I know some people are really worried about this. It means that all these humans are going to be out of work and human creativity could be obsolete. But I have absolutely the opposite intuition. I think this is going to be very liberating. It's going to allow us to pursue. We started the conversation with creativity, and I think it's a good place to end it. We're going to unleash a world historical amount of human creativity, and it's going to be really extraordinary what all these people unshackled will be able to accomplish. So I hope it's something to look forward to.
Wow. 3 amazing insights to wrap it up. Eric, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you having it on the show, and hopefully we'll see you in the next season.
All right. Looking forward to it.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the season 1 finale episode of the Lean AI podcast. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Eric Ries as much as I did. really amazing insights on some of the key themes that came out of this season. The Lean AI podcast is brought to you by Lean Startup Co. To find out more about our Lean AI approach to generating more AI wins with far less wasted time and investment, including our training workshops, pilot programs, and full implementation offerings, visit us at www.leanstartup.co. Search the Lean AI podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Lean Startup Co., thanks for listening and sharing with your colleagues and friends if you found this episode insightful.